Erev Tov, everyone. It is Wednesday night. It is 8 p.m. here on the east side of the United States, here in the diaspora. This is the Maimon Beit Knesset, therefore it must be the Torah study in depth with yours truly, Rabbi A. Good to have you here this evening. Good to see you, Donald. I'm sure others will be coming, as they usually do. Okay, so we are going to continue our in-depth study of the Torah, as we have been doing for a while now. We are in the Sefer Bereshit. We are in the Parsha Terumah, and we left off in, chapter 25. And we left off at verse 7. That's where we're going to pick up tonight. Of course, we are studying the Torah, so we will do the blessing for the study of Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivaanu lasok b'divrei Torah. Okay. And those of you who are watching on your tablets or your phones and don't have access to the chat, we're glad to have you here too. Even if we can't talk to you or you can't be in the chat room, it's good to have you there because I can see you. Well, not physically. I can see your numbers, so let's go with that. Okay. Marshall has joined us. Good to see you, Marsh. Okay, so again, we left off at chapter 7, so that's where we're going to pick up tonight. Which is odd. The way they actually, from verse 6 to verse 7, is kind of an odd break there, because we have basically at the end of verse 6, which is the oil, takashim skins, and the shittim wood, and the oil for the lighting, semicolon, spices for anointing, and for the raising of the smoke and the incense, semicolon, and then we pick up with verse 7. Verse 7 continues on from verse 6, shoham stones for the shoham stones and filling stones for the ephod and the choshen. And so Rashi goes on to say about this very short statement here in the Torah, actually has quite a bit to say about it. He says, shoham stones. These were needed to meet, these were needed there to meet the requirement of the ephod, which is mentioned in Parsha Tetzaveh. Filling stones, because they make an indented setting for them in gold. And we'll get into detail about how these stones were actually set. It's actually quite interesting. You may actually recognize it from, rings and stuff that people wear these days. Because they make an indented setting for them in gold and put the stones there to fill the indentation. They are called filling stones. And the place of the setting is called a frame. Okay. For the ephod and the choshen, the shoham stones for the ephod and the filling stones for the choshen, the choshen and the ephod are described in Parsha Tetzaveh, and actually in great detail. They are types of ornaments for the Kohen Gadol. Yair has joined us. Good to see you, Yair. Richard, good to see you too. Okay, we'll catch up. We'll try and catch up with everybody as we go along here. So, a further commentary on this, which goes back to the ephod, which is mentioned in Parsha Tetzaveh. The further commentary on this says that although the shoham stone was used in the choshen too, the ones mentioned here are those used in the ephod. The shoham stone of the choshen is included among the unnamed filling stones mentioned later in the verse. Okay. As it regards, there it is, the filling stones for the Choshen, for the commentary says that the verse could have been misunderstood as saying that the sham stones and filling stones were meant for both the Choshen and the ephod. Okay. Moving on to the Choshen and the ephod is described in Parshat Tetzaveh again. For the commentary says Mikdash can be translated as sanctity. But Israel is not being commanded to create the sanctity itself. Rashi paraphrases it as Beit Mikdusha, house of sanctity. Because they are being commanded to build a place to house the sanctity of God. Okay, so now we go on to verse 8. Verse 8 goes on to say, they shall make me a sanctuary so that I may dwell among them. Rashi goes on to say, they shall make me a sanctuary, and they will make a house of sanctity dedicated to my name. Now, we already talked about this in the previous verse, about the sanctity, and then basically the other commentary is just referring to another note in here. And that's all we have on that. Okay. Thought there might be more, but verse 9. In conformance with all that I will show you, the form of the tabernacle, the form of all its vessels, and so shall you do. Rashi goes on to say here, in conformance with all that I will show you. Here, the format of the Mishkan, this verse is connected to the verse above it. They shall make me a sanctuary in conformance with all that I show you. So shall you do. Rashi goes on to say that in future generations, so shall you do. In future generations, period. Should one of the implements be lost, or when it will make the or when you will make the implements of the eternal house, such as the tables, the candelabra, the lavers, and the stands that King Solomon made. Make them according to the format of these implements that you are making for the Mishkan. If the beginning of the verse were not connected to this verse above it, it should have been written, so shall you do, but rather it should not have been written, and so shall you do, but so shall you do. And it would then have been discussing the present construction of the Mishkan and its implements. So the addition of the vav is pointing to a future time, which actually could be the present time, because we're still waiting for the building of the Beit HaMikdash, and those implements will need to be remade once again. Unfortunately, in Tetzaveh, we get very, very detailed instructions, and then when we go to the Talmud, and even in Rashi's commentary, we'll see that there's a very, very detailed about exactly what they were, how they looked, and how they were actually made. Okay, so verse for the commentary. Okay, so with regard to all that I will show you, further commentary says, in conformance is read as a continuation of the previous verse beginning with, they shall make me a sanctuary, although so that I may dwell among them. Or, breaks up the flow of the thought, I'll say. Without Rashi's comment, we would read the entire verse as complete independent sentence. Remember, too, that there is no punctuation in the Torah. Okay, we have to gain the punctuation from the text itself, and hence why we have things like Rashi's commentary, and we have the Mishnah and the Gemara and the Talmud and so on and so forth to actually define those things for us. So where does the period land in a sentence? Is it joined? Is it part of the same thought, or is it a separate thought altogether? Okay, in conformance with all that I show you, the construct of the Mishkan and its implements, so shall you do, as Rashi interprets the verse. Sees Rashi's next comment, the conclusion, and so shall you do stands by itself. That's from Be'er Yitzhak. Okay, continuing on, so shall you do, for the commentary from the Talmud, and folio tractate. Let me get my tongue to actually work right. Rabbi, even the locations in the Torah have been correct, so it does not surprise me that to learn that everything is, actually. And I've actually made this point before because Hebrew being a very unique language, not having, you cannot take a single word from the Torah and know what it actually means. Or what it's referring to. You have to take it in context. That's why I have a great issue with people who says, well, it says here this word. Well, let's back up here and let's get the full context of this. Now, we also know that there are 150 Tehillim, right? And if we look at the Tehillim with the punctuation as it has, but if we go back and we reread this and we redo the punctuation, we get completely new Tehillim. So do we have 150 Tehillim, or do we have thousands of Tehillim in there? I'd say we have thousands. David has joined us. Good to have you, David. I hope your mother is doing well. Okay, so with regard to so shall you do, Tractate Sanhedrin, folio 16b, now that Rashi is in his preceding comment has interpreted and so shall you do as an independent statement, the phrase becomes redundant. Once God has commanded, and they shall make me a sanctuary in conformance with all that I show you, what point does and so shall you do add? Rashi answers that and so shall you do refers to future generations. And that's from, again, Be'er Yitzhak. The implements of the Beit HaMikdash did not have the same dimensions as the implements of the Mishkan. They were made, however, proportional to the implements in the Mishkan. Okay, so I would dare say that if I may venture my own opinion, that the implements in the Beit HaMikdash were actually longer, larger than those of the ones in the Mishkan, because the Mishkan basically was constantly moving. The Beit HaMikdash was a stationary place. And you also had many more Kohanim and many more Leviim and stuff like that. So, like a laver that was used when Aharon became the Kohen Gadol, and his four sons. At first, if you think of a laver that they had to wash their feet and their hands in, would not necessarily be that big, more something about the size of a kiddie pool. However, in the Beit Hamikdash, you have many more Kohanim that are actually going to have to wash their feet and wash their hands in a laver, which is going to require much more water. Therefore, it's going to have to be much bigger. But again, Rashi points out here that they were proportional to each other. So you have that. Okay, so where it refers to... Okay, this is just carrying on with the same thing. The implements of the eternal house. Further commentary, the Beit Hamikdash in contrast with the temporary Mishkan. And there's another point that I want to make there, too, is that the Mishkan still exists. The Mishkan was not taken apart, given away, dismantled, whatever. The Mishkan still exists. It existed during the first Beit HaMikdash, the second Beit HaMikdash, and it still exists to this day. Why would we need to do that? Is because the same reason that the Aron HaKodesh, the Ark of the Covenant, the Holy Ark, had the staves in it that were permanently attached to it, which was a symbol to the Jews that this is not yours. You are allowed to use it, but if you do not behave in the way that you are supposed to do, as God has commanded you to do, that Aron HaKodesh could be taken away. Therefore, the staves were always in there. Same thing with the Beit HaMikdash. The Beit HaMikdash still remained and remains to this day. Wherever it is located, still remains this day, so that we understand that it is our behavior that dictates whether we have a Beit HaMikdash or whether we have a Mishkan. Okay, so there's a French term in here, and I am not going to even attempt it. So let's see. Anything else we want to hit on here as far as a further commentary? No, we do not. Okay, so we're on to verse 10. And they shall make an aron of shittim wood, 2.5 amot in length, and amah, and a half a width, amah and a half its width, and an amah and a half its height. Rashi goes on to say, and I thought he would actually have more to say here. He says, they shall make an aron, similar to arks that they make without legs, like the trunk in which they call, eshrine in Old French, which rests on its bottom. Now, I'm sure you've seen pictures of representations of the ark, and many of them that you will see that it's actually standing on feet, like a chest of drawers would actually set on a set of feet. However, when we get further into the text, we'll find out that specifically God has said that this is not to be setting on feet; it's supposed to set on its bottom. Okay, no feet. So if you see those drawings, those representations, you know they're wrong. They're wrong. Okay. So let's see. Yeah, the further commentary just goes on to say that it does not stand on legs or a pedestal. And that's all there is to the further commentary for that. On to verse 11. You shall cover it with pure gold from inside and from outside. You shall cover it, and you shall make it on it a gold diadem all around, which is kind of a skirt thing. Okay. Rashi goes on to say, from inside and from inside and from outside you shall cover it. Bezalel made 3 arcs. Technically made 3 arcs. Okay, so 2 gold and 1 wooden. The four walls and the bottom 4 each, and they were open on the top. And he put the wood one into the gold, the larger golden one, and the smaller golden one into the wood one, and overlaid the upper rim with gold. It thus turns out that it is covered with gold from inside and from outside. A golden diadem, a sort of crown going all the way around above its edge. Okay, hence why it's called a crown. Okay, and he made the outer golden ark higher than the inner golden one, until it rose opposite the thickness of the lid of the Aharon, and slightly above it. When the lid rests upon the thickness of the walls of the Aron, the diadem rises slightly above the entire thickness of the lid, and it is a symbol for the crown of Torah. Now you know why a Torah scroll usually has on the Eitz Chaim has crowns on it, because this is the golden diadem. Typically, the ones that we see on the Torah are made out of silver, because we don't want to make it exactly the Aron. Okay, so there is actually a diagram of this. Let me see if I can find it again. It's probably on the next page, isn't it? Yep. Okay. So here we have the diagram, and that's what I love about this Rashi's commentary, is having these wonderful diagrams in here. So you can see there's the outer one, and the inner wood one, and the inner gold one, and then the lid. I think I actually had my students actually kind of figure out approximately what the weight of the ark was based on the dimensions that we have, and of course we have to make some certain assumptions, because we don't know what the thickness of the gold actually was, but we know it had to be substantial enough to hold itself, and we figured it out, and we found out that the ark was approximately the weight of a Volkswagen Beetle. It was heavy. Okay, so with regard to and thus it turns it was covered from golden inside and from the outside. The further commentary says this is from the Talmud, Tractate Shekalim, folio 16b, and Tractate Yomah, folio 72b. Had the verse said, Babit, trusty magnifying glass, Babayit, Overchutz Babayit, on the inside and on the outside, it would have meant that Bezalel was to make only one ark, an ark of wood, and then plate it with gold from the inside and the outside, and from the outside, implies that the ark of wood is to be constructed on the inside, and one ark on the outer ark, and on the outer ark of gold, and by the outside of another in the inner ark of gold. In the inner ark of gold. Yeah, okay. So as we saw in the picture, so it's basically a box, and with a box in it, with a box in it. Okay. Okay, so where it regards to it is the symbol for the crowns of Torah, the golden diadem. Again, from Tractate Yoma, folio 72b, Shemot Rabbah, chapter 34, verse 2, the figurative crown worn by the Torah scholar in Avot 4:12 is symbolized by the diadem of the Aron, for the tablets of the covenant were kept inside the Aron. According to one opinion, the Torah scroll written by Moshe was also placed inside the Aron, while according to another opinion, it was kept on a shelf that protruded from it, from the Aron. Okay. Now, where they actually draw that from, there's a Rashi comments on this in Deuteronomy chapter 31:26. I myself believe that the scroll that Moshe Rabbeinu wrote was actually in the Aron. Okay, so moving on. Okay, verse 12. Just keeping an eye on the chat room, see if we got any comments or anything. Okay, so verse 12. And you shall pour for it you shall pour for it, basically cast it, 4 rings of gold, and place them on the 4 corners, 2 rings on one side and 2 rings on the other side, on the second side. Okay, so why do we need to do that? Because we didn't want people going on and actually putting the ring on the corner. You wouldn't have been able to put the staves in it. So 2 on one side, 2 on the other side, so you can put the staves in. Pretty simple, but needed to be said. Okay. So Rashi goes on to say, and you shall pour. This word is an expression of casting, as it is rendered by Targum Onkelos. Of course, if you've seen casting, you know exactly what they're talking about. It's very, very just, it's actually molten metal, and it's actually poured into a form. Sometimes it's just a form made out of sand. Sometimes it's they use what they call the lost wax method, where they form the outside around a wax impression, and then as they pour it, the wax gets burned off and is replaced by the molten metal. Its corners. The rings were placed on the upper corners next to the lid, 2 on one side and 2 on the other, at the width of the Aron. The poles were put into them, and the length of the Aron separated between the poles 2.5 amot between one pole and another pole, so that 2 people who carried the Aron could walk between them. So it is explained in Melachot, in Perek Shtei Halechem. Okay, 2 rings on one side. These are the 4 rings that are mentioned at the beginning of the verse. Here it is explained that to you where they were located. The vav in the word ushte is superfluous. And the word's meaning is the same as shete, without the prefix of the vav. Two rings and not and two rings. But you can resolve it as follows. And two rings of these rings are on its one side. Okay, its side. The word zilom means its side. Okay, so good to know. Good to know. Okay. Further commentary on this, with regards to you shall pour, Onkelos renders you shall pour a word related to matcha. Onkelos translation of matcha is molten. Okay. 4. This is an interesting one. This is related to. Okay, its four corners. Onkelos renders its four corners. The word can also mean legs, and that is how Ibn Ezra translates the word here. Okay, so it's two rings were placed on. Well, it's the word is to be understood as it's rendered by Onkelos. Its corners, its legs. Of course, again, we've already discussed the idea that the Aron didn't have any legs. It sat flat on its bottom. Okay. With regard to she would make those numbers so very small, they would be easier to pick out. There it is. So that two people could who carried the ark could walk between them. The further commentary says on that, two people refers to those on one side. 4 Leviim would carry the Aharon, 2 in the front and 2 in the back. Again, like I said, the Aharon, when we figured it out, is actually a fairly substantial weight. They would all stand between the poles so that the left pole would rest on the left shoulder and of the Leviim and on the left, and the Aharon, while the right pole would rest on the right shoulder of the Leviim on the right, as if the rings had been placed so that the poles would run along the length of the Aharon. The distance between them would be the width of the Aharon. Which space is too far, space for two men standing side by side. The rings must therefore have been placed so that the poles ran along the width of the Aharon, allowing 2.5 amot for the two Leviim to stand in. Okay. Okay. Verse 13. And you shall make staves of shittim wood and cover them with gold. Rashi says staves. This means poles. And I'm so glad he clarified that, and that is the only comment that we have by Rashi in this. The further commentary on that one is basically elsewhere. Bed means linen. Okay. Bidet. Bidet means linen. Okay. There you have it. I'm sorry. Do they really need to put that in? I guess they thought they did. Okay, so no commentary on 14 and very little on 15. So we'll go from 14 to 15. and insert the staves into the rings on the sides of the aron with which to carry the aron. 15. The staves shall remain in the rings of the aron, they shall not be removed from it. And I would think there would be a lot more commentary on here, but Rashi says on this one, they shall not be removed from it forever. That's it. That's all he's got to say about it. Okay. The further commentary, though, says that Tractate Yoma, Folio 72a, this verse has already been said to the people shall be in the rings, said that the pole shall be in the rings to carry the aharon. If the verse goes on to say, and they shall not be removed from it, it is saying that they must not be removed from it even when it is no longer being carried. Okay, and they actually go on to talk about the staves and how the staves were actually put in. They were actually put in, they were affixed so that they could not be taken out. It's what we call it a friction fit, so that once it was put in, that it would take great effort to pull it back out. Okay, not that it was impossible to do it, but it would take a lot of effort to do it. Okay, so we're on to 16. You shall put into the aharon the testimony that I shall give you. Rashi goes on to say, you shall put into the aharon. In this context, the term el aharon is equivalent of into the aharon. Again, the testimony. The Torah which serves as testimony between me and you. Then I charge you with the commandments that are written on it. Okay. Further commentary on that regarding written on it. Pesikta Zeturasa, chapter 40, verse 20, below, where the Torah relates the process of the construction of the Mishkan, it says, and he put the testimony into the aharon. There, Rashi explains the testimony referred to the tablets of the covenant rather than to the Torah. In that context, testimony must mean the tablets because the Mishkan was erected in the second year of the Israelites' journey in the desert, while the Torah was not yet given in its entirety until the 40th year. In our verse, Rashi explains that the testimony as the Torah becomes as the Torah because the verse refers to testimony which I will give you, and the tablets of the covenant have already been given. Hence why I say it was actually the Torah that Moshe Rabbeinu wrote was actually in the Aron. But again, like I said, that is my opinion. Okay. We'll go on to 17. And you shall make a lid of pure gold, 2.5 amot its length, and an amam, and a half its width. Rashi goes on to say a lid. This means a covering over the aron, for the aron was open at the top, which we have already seen from the diagram. And he would lay the lid on it like a board. 2.5 amot its length, like the length of the aron, and its width like the width of the aron. And it rested on the thickness of all 4 walls. all four walls of the Aron. Even though the Torah did not give a measurement for its thickness, our rabbis explained that its thickness was a tefach. And what's a tefach? We'll find out. Okay, let's go back here and find the additional commentary. Well, there is no additional commentary until we get to this tefach. Okay, tefach, from Tractate Sukkah, Folio 5a, a tefach is a handbreadth, approximately 4 inches. Various reckons as 3 to 4 inches. Most of the Rishonim actually say that a handbreadth is 4 inches. 6 techavim, in a certain cases, 5 techavim equals 1 amah, usually translated as cubit. Okay. We're on to 18. You shall make two cheruvim of gold. Beaten shall you make them from both ends of the lid. Okay, this gets a little interesting here. Rashi goes on to say, cheruvim, they each had the image of a child's face. Beaten shall you make it. This means you shall not make them separately and attach them to the ends of the lid after they have been made in the manner of a metal worker, which is called solder in Old French, solder as we talk about it today. Rather, take a great deal of gold at the outset of the making of the lid and strike it in the middle with a hammer and a mallet, and thereby the ends of the solid piece of gold protrude upward. So basically you're thinning the metal in the center. That metal has to go somewhere. It's going to go out to the outer edges. And as it does, as metal usually will do, it will curl up. Okay. Solid piece of gold protrudes upward, and then shape the cheruvim out of the protrusions of its ends. Beaten. In Old French, I'm not even going to try that. I am not even going to try that. Certain word in Old French. Well, let's see. According to the Hebrew, it would be Bela Eiz. And I don't think that's actually Bela Eiv. I don't think it's actually right for the Old French. Like the word in the phrase knocking against each other. Ends of the lid. This means the ends of the lid. Well, thank you for that, Rashi. Never would have guessed it. Okay. Okay, further commentary on this one. The faces of a child's face. From, again, Tractate Sukkah, Folio 5b, the word keruv is akin to the Aramaic kereva, like a child. Karevia, like a child. Okay. And then we have the modern French word for the English word solder. Okay. Yeah, there's that old French word again. Batu, modern French batu. Beaten, the English word bat. Batter and beat are all related to this word. Thank you very much. Okay. Knocking against each other, like the word in the phrase knocking against each other from the book of Daniel. Sefer Daniel, chapter 5, verse 6. Miksha denotes knocking, indicate that the cheruvim are shaped by striking it with a hammer. Okay. So Donald says he's trying to visualize what the lid would have looked like. Oh, let me give you a hint here. Okay. And we think we're all that these days. I mean, they made this thing, pounded it, into a shape, and then made these beautiful figures on the two sides of it out of the same metal. It's the same thing with the menorah. It was all made out of one solid piece of gold. Okay, hammered out, it says. Okay. Make sure we're not missing it. Okay, the ends of the lid. This means the ends of the lid. Further commentary says on that, the term could have been interpreted as the edges of the lid. The cheruvim would have risen from the sides of the lid rather than from its upper surface. Rashi explains that the term means the ends of the lid, ends of the top of the lid. Okay, so we are halfway through our time here, and I lost my bookmark. I have to get me another one here. Gotta love post-it notes, I'll tell you what. As if you can get them apart. Okay, going to be difficult. There we go. Okay, so we are going to take our break, and when we return, we'll pick up at verse 19, and we'll continue on with the Torah study. Okay, so everybody stay tuned. We'll be back in 6.
Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Delicious things to eat.
The popcorn can't be beat. The sparkling drinks are just dandy. The chocolate bars and the candy. So let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
It's intermission time, folks, so hurry, hurry, hurry. Step right over to our refreshment center for the most extravagant array of refreshment goodies ever assembled under one roof. Enjoy breathtaking, mouth-watering goodies, everything from a snack to a delicious full meal. At our refreshment center, you'll find a large variety of goodies to satisfy your hunger, your thirst, or your sweet tooth. So hurry, hurry, hurry. Visit our refreshment center now. The show starts in 5 minutes. show starts in 4 minutes. The show starts in 3 minutes. The show starts in 2 minutes. The show starts in 1 minute. And now, on with the show.
Sorry, wrong button. Okay. Okay, probably fooled you. Thought we were ending the show early. Nope, we are not. Okay. So we're on to verse 19 now. And you shall make one keruv from this end and one keruv from this end. From the lid shall you make the keruvim at its two ends. Rashi goes on to say here that you shall make one keruv from this end, so that you should not say there are two cheruvim at each end. Okay. It was necessary for the verse to explain one keruv from this end, from this end. From the lid itself shall you make the keruvim. This is the explanation of beaten shall you make them. You shall not make them separately and then attach them to the lid. Okay, which we already went through this already, but again, sometimes we hear these things twice, and usually there is a reason for it. So the additional commentary on this one says that, let's see, it was necessary for the verse to explain one keruv from this end. The verse appears redundant, as I just said. For the preceding verse has stated that there should be two cheruvim and that they should be at the two ends of the lid. Rashi explains that this verse is needed to clarify an ambiguity. The preceding verse could have been misunderstood as saying that there should be two cheruvim at each end of the lid, a total of 4 cheruvim. This verse states clearly that there should be only 2 cherubim, one at each end. Okay. Well stated, Rashi. Well stated. Verse 20. The cherubim shall be with its wings spread upward, sheltering the lid with their wings, and with their faces toward one another. Toward the lid shall the faces of the shall be the faces of the cherubim. Okay. Rashi goes on to say, with wings spread. This verse is saying that you shall not make them with their wings lying down, but rather spread and raised high next to their heads, so that the space between the wings and the lid should be 10 techafim, which would be, if a tefach is 4 inches, then that would be 40 inches, as stated in Tractate Sukkah. Okay, so the further commentary to this goes right back to Tractate Sukkah, Tractate Sukkah, Folio 5b. Although the Mishkan and the Beit HaMikdash were not the same size, they and their furnishings were made in similar proportions. Now, the Beit HaMikdash was 30 amot tall. 30, that would be 45 feet. If a cubit is approximately 18 inches. Okay. And its cherubim were 10 amot high. It should be 15 feet high. That's tall. That is tall. So that the cherubim were 1/3 the height of the building. But the Mishkan was only 10 amot tall, which would make it 15 feet tall. The equivalent of 60 tefachim. So if the cherubim in the Mishkan should have reached 1/3 the height, or 20 tefachim above the floor, the Aron was 1.5 amot, or 10 or 9 tefachim tall, and the lid took up another tefachim. Thus, the cherubim were 20 tefachim minus 9 of the Aron minus 1 of the lid, or 10 tefachim tall. I hope you wrote that all down so you can figure it all out. Okay, because I'm not going to. So, we're going to move on to verse 21. You shall place the lid on the aron from above, and into the aron you shall put the testimony that I shall give you. Okay, so shall put the testimony into the aron. You shall put the testimony that I shall give you. Okay. Rashi goes on to say this, and into the aron you shall put the testimony. I do not know and this is one of the things I love about Rashi, is that he's not afraid to say, I don't know, which is great because it leaves the discussion open. We can still discuss this because Rashi himself wasn't sure or didn't know, just plain out didn't know. So, I do not know for sure why this was repeated, for it has already been stated. And you shall put into the aron the testimony. It is possible to say, in answer to this question, that the verse is stated to teach us that while it is an aron alone, without a lid, he should first put the testimony into it. Of course, you wouldn't be able to do it afterwards. And afterwards, he should put the lid upon it. And so we have found that when he erected the Mishkan, it says, and he put the testimony into the aron. And only afterwards does the verse say, and he put the lid on the aron, on top. Okay. So this regarding the into the aron. Yerushalmi Shechalim, chapter 6, verse 1, verse 21 says, and into the aron you shall put the testimony, rather than, and you shall put the testimony into the aron. By having into the aron at the beginning of the clause, it implies that the testimony shall be placed into the aron before the lid is put over it. You may not put the lid on first and then raise it in order to put the testimony. Okay, so you put it in and then you close it. Don't close it and then jack up one end, and slide it in. Okay. Verse 22. It is there that I shall arrange audience with you, and I shall speak with you from atop the lid, from between the two cherubim that are on the aron of the testimony, and it is all that I shall command you pertaining to the children of Israel, Bnei Israel. Okay, Rashi goes on to say, I shall arrange audience. When I will fix an audience for you to speak with you, I will fix that place for the audience, and it will come there. It will come there and speak to you. I shall speak with you from atop the lid. But elsewhere it says, and Hashem spoke to him from the tent of meeting, saying, and so on and so forth. This tent of meeting is part of the Mishkan, outside the parochet, whereas the aron was behind the parochet. Two verses are thus found to contradict each other. The third verse comes to resolve the conflict between them. When Moshe would come into the tent of meeting, he would hear the voice communicating with him from above the lid of the aron, etc. Moshe would enter the Mishkan. As soon as he came into the entrance, the voice would descend from the heavens to the point between the cherubim. And from there it would go forth to be heard by Moshe in the tent of meeting. And and it is all that all that I shall command you pertaining to the children of Israel. The va prefix which introduces the phrase is extra and incidental. There are many like it in Scripture, and the vav should be interpreted as follows: and that which I will speak to you there is all that I shall command you pertaining to the children of Israel. Okay, maybe the further commentary will give us some clarity on this. So, just flip back here and make sure we didn't miss anything. No, we did not. Okay, so, in that I will come and speak to you. Further commentary says, Rashi, in his comments to Leviticus, chapter 1, verse 1, describes how God would call Moshe before addressing him, arranging audience. In this verse corresponds to that call. The verse could have been understood as saying that the call to prophecy would take place only in the Mishkan. Rashi explains that this is not the case. The call to prophecy could take place anywhere. There of the verse is not where the initial call would take place, but rather where the audience would take place. Okay. With regards to and it is all that I shall command you pertaining to the children of Israel. The further commentary says, according to our text, all that I shall command you is the direct object of I shall speak to you, the beginning of the verse. According to Rashi's text, and which precedes all that I shall command you, separates it from I shall say to you, and makes a separate clause of it. The preceding, the predicate of the clause is implicit, and the word who, added by Rashi, according to Rashi, the verse says, I shall speak to you, and that which I shall speak to you there in all that I shall command you pertaining to the children of Israel. Okay. 23. You shall make a shulchan. Now, this is a word that we're familiar with, which is the Shulchan Aruch, the code of Jewish law. Well, Shulchan Aruch actually means the set table. Okay, so a shulchan is a table. Okay, so you shall make a shulchan of shittim wood, 2 amot its length, and an amah its width, and an amah its height, and a half its height. Rashi goes on to say here, its height, the height of its legs along with the thickness of the tabletop. Okay, I can go with that. No further commentary on that one, so we'll go on to 24. You shall cover it with pure gold, and you shall make for it a golden diadem all around, similar to the Aron. Rashi goes on to say, a golden diadem. This is a symbol of a royal crown, for the shulchan expresses wealth and greatness. As they say with reference to a sumptuously set table, a table of kings. Okay. Further commentary on this basically is just all referencing back to other things that we've already talked about. Okay. 25. You shall make for it a frame of 1 tefach all around, and you shall make a golden diadem for its frame all around. Rashi goes on to say a frame. This is to be understood as is rendered by Targum Onkelos an enclosure. The sages of Israel were in dispute about the matter. There are those who say that it was above, surrounding the table, like a border along the edge of a nobleman's table. Excuse me. And there are those who say that it was below the table, set in a place from leg to leg, on the four sides of the table. And the slab of the table, i.e., the tabletop, lies upon the frame. Excuse me. You shall make a golden diadem for its frame. It is the same diadem mentioned above in the preceding verse. And here the Torah expressly tells you that it was on the frame. Okay, so again, we have these great diagrams here. So I'm going to hold that up for a second, give you a chance to look at it. Okay. Further commentary on this one says, let's go back here to it has to do with this dispute. There it is. And there are those who say it was below the tabletop, set in place from leg to leg. For the commentary, it says surrounding the table implies that the frame went all the way around the table without any breaks. Running from leg to leg indicates that the frame was below the tabletop, the legs of the table divided into four sections. So we know that's obviously incorrect. Okay. As it regards to the slab of the tabletop lies upon that frame. Okay, further commentary says from Menachot, folio 96b, Rashi in his commentary to Menachot maintains that according to this view, the tabletop lay upon the frame but was not attached to it. However, according to the view that the frame was on the tabletop, the frame too was attached to the tabletop. Okay, I'll go along with that. Okay, where it regards to, this is the same diadem mentioned above in the preceding verse. Some commentaries, for example, Hiskuni and Sforno, understand that there were two diadems. Rashi rejects this view. I think it's fairly plain that we're only talking about one because Torah's only saying one. Okay. And then the Torah expressly tells you that it was on the frame. Further commentary says, according to the view that the frame was below the tabletop, the gold plating that covered the frame projected upward above the tabletop, and the diadem was fashioned from the projection. Thus, the diadem was on the frame. Okay. Okay. No commentary on 26. So we'll go from 26 to 27. You shall make for it 4 rings of gold and place the rings upon the 4 corners of its 4 legs. Again, like I said, no commentary by Rashi on that one. The rings shall be opposite, this is verse 27, the rings shall be opposite the frame for the holding of the stave to carry the shulchan. Rashi goes on to say the rings on the side be opposite the frame, insert into the table's legs, set over against the ends of the frame. For the housings of the staves, those rings should be housings into which to insert the poles. For housings, this means for the purpose of housings for the poles, as it's rendered by Targum Onkelos, a place for the poles. Okay. Now, the poles on this one could actually be removed, and they actually were removed when they were set down. All the implements, everything that had poles for carrying, were removed once they were set into place in the Mishkan, and then, with the exception of the Aron's poles were set in place, and they were left there. Always left there. And again, like I said, it was as Rashi will comment later on, saying that this was what we call a friction fit. So it couldn't be removed. At least it couldn't be removed very easily. Okay. So go on to 28. You shall make staves of shittim wood and cover them with gold, and the shulchan shall be carried through them. Okay. So the Rashi goes on to say the table shall be carried through them. The verb v'nisa is in the nifal, indicating that it is a passive verb. The shulchan will be carried by means of them. Okay. So the further commentary, actually I didn't hit the further commentary on verse 27 about the rings and stuff, so let's go back to that, hit that. So with regard to inserting the table's legs and set over against the ends of the frame, the further commentary says from Sefer Zikaron, explains that Rashi's comment follows the opinion that the frame was under the table. The illustration reflects that view, which is one of the pictures that we showed earlier. Okay, those rings should be housings which insert the poles. Further commentary says the verse could have been understood as saying that the rings would hold some other housings into which the poles would be inserted. Rashi explains that the rings themselves should be housings for the poles. Okay. As it regards housing, this means, for the purpose of housings of the poles, the further commentary says, in many texts of Rashi, this comment has only two words. Nitzarek Batim, for the purpose of housings. And the word Levadim is a heading for Rashi's next comment. According to this reading, Rashi would be making the incomprehensible statement that the Targum's a place for the poles is the definition of the word Levadim. We have therefore followed the text of the first printed edition of Rashi's, which has the words Levadim as one of the words of Rashi's commentary rather than as a heading. I'm sure you were worried about that, so now that we've got that cleared up. As it relates to, and it is rendered by Targum Onkelos, a place for the poles. The further commentary says, having stated that the rings themselves are the housings, Rashi goes on to explain that the lamed prefix of the word levatim, this thus means for the purpose of. He cites the Targum in support of this because the Targum uses the lamed prefix only once before retraim and translation of badim. And the Targum has no lamed prefix for Etra, the translation of the Batim. This indicates that the two Lamed prefixes of the Hebrew have different meanings. The Lamed of Levatim, which means for the purpose of, does not have to be expressed explicitly by the Targum, while the Lamed of Levadim, which means simply for, does. Okay. Okay. Getting back to 28. The further commentary on this, which is really relevant to the Shulchan, will be carried by means of them. The word Nsa, the root Nun Shin Aleph, can have any of three meanings: we will carry, it is carried, and it was carried. In the simple call, the a verb, a verb root which begins with the letter nun, drops its nun in further conjugations, and the second root letter takes the dagash to stand in for the missing nun. Furthermore, if the word is also of a class called a nache, lamed aleph, the third letter of the root is an aleph. The second letter is vowelized with a kamat. When the word in the first person plural is its person and a number are indicated by the nun prefix. Thus, in the call, future tense, first person plural, nisa means we will carry. This is not the meaning of the word here, because that would imply that the speaker got alone with someone else, the plural we, would carry the shulchan. In the passive nifal, the verb drops its nun in the past and present conjugations, and the second root letter takes a dagesh to stand in for the missing nun. The root then takes the nun prefix and to indicate the nifal. For each person, the number except third person singular, a suffix is then added. Thus, nisa in the nifil is with no suffix can mean either it is carried or it was carried. Finally, the vav of the Vinasa, Rashi teaches, should be understood as the conversive vav, which changes past to future. Therefore, Vinasa in our verse means it shall be carried. Okay, we made it through that. Okay. I think that's where we're going to stop, because this next one is a little more in depth. I don't want to break it up as we're going through it, because there's a lot of detail regarding the rest of the Shulchan. So we're going to stop there. And next week we'll pick up with verse 29. Barakat Adonai Elohim melech haolam asher natan lanu Torah emet v'chayei olam natan b'tcheinu barakat Adonai noten haTorah. Okay. Don't forget that Friday evening at 8 p.m. Eastern is the Kabbalat and Ma'ariv Shabbat service, and then Shabbat morning at 10 a.m. is Shachrit and Musaf. Back here again. Monday night is a Zeta Story Corner, which he will continue on with the Isaac Brev's book. And Tuesday, you will not want to miss Tuesday. The rabbis discuss, and it's going to be extremely interesting because we are going to talk about this question from the din about owning a dog. It should be very, very interesting. So all you animal lovers, you will definitely not want to miss this. Okay, and then right back here on next Wednesday evening for the Torah study in depth. Okay, I want to thank you all for being here this evening. Hope to see you again next week or on Shabbat. Until then, we'll simply say, Laila Tov.